Okay, so when we look at Unit 1 in particular, it is broken down into 8 learning outcomes. And what I will be doing later today would be to also look at ensuring that you are able to get presentations for learning outcome 3, 4, 5 before the end of this week. So you're able to plan and read ahead as well.
Okay.
Our focus today is going to be on learning outcome 1, which is where we are going to look at roles and responsibilities and obviously relationship that we are able to build as a teacher with our students or with our peers in a particular setup related to education and training. Now, in order to look at not making it abstract and obviously descriptive, what I've done in some of the presentations is I've actually brought in examples that I do as a teacher, as a lecturer in higher education, and some part of that would be facilitated when you read the slides, and you would see the practical examples of being put in to highlight them rather than just descriptively and abstractly talk about the various assessment criteria. Now, one of the main things that we want to look at in learning outcome 1 is to understand the roles, responsibilities, and relationships in education and training, and what are they and how they formed. So when you look at roles and responsibilities, as you would look at in any particular educational setup, there are lots and lots of different types of roles. This is a question which sometimes I tend to ask my learners when they say, I want to get into teaching or I want to become a teacher. But then I ask them this question, what sector do you want to become a teacher in? What area or subject discipline you want to go into? And when you say we want to become a teacher, is it a primary school teacher? Is it a secondary school teacher? Do you want to teach in colleges? Do you want to teach in universities?
Special educational needs.
Yeah, and special education needs. So
that's my
sense, yeah. And that is where it tends to, kind of beckon on them that, okay, hang on. I've just thought of the title and I've not gone into details in terms of what I would be looking at doing or which is the area that I would be getting into. Now, the second question that I normally ask them is, are you sure that this is an area that you want to get into? Can you see yourself doing the same type of job and executing the same type of responsibilities on a day in, day out basis for a number of years, say for 5 years, 10 years?
Yes.
And if the answers to these questions tend to be yes, some of the other questions that I ask them is, what other skill set do you have to get into this field? Why do you think you are suitable to get into this specific field? And if the answers successively tend to be yes, then I say that yes, you understand what the role is, you understand what your responsibilities are going to be in teaching. And within that, as you start to do some of these responsibilities and take up the role, you'd also be looking at growing in your role in the next couple of years when you add responsibilities or take up more responsibility to be able to look at maybe a rise in your salary or the job that you hold. But if I have to break that down into some sort of a pyramid, they tend to be responsibilities or roles within teaching and learning. So either you're going to be a teacher or you're going to be a facilitator who would be helping out in teaching. So say, for example, a teaching assistant, somebody who's helping to plan and prepare resources, and somebody who's looking at delivering to the learners or students in the class. Now, give or take, some part of it also relates to assessment and feedback. Feedback tends to be to the learners, where you also tends to you get feedback from your own supervisors, because sometimes you have to adapt your delivery in terms of ensuring that you're meeting the needs of the learners. So in such cases, there is assessment and there is feedback. You would be assessed by maybe your supervisor. You'd be assessed by, say, for example, if I'm the principal of a school, there would be somebody in quality, there would be somebody in training and development who would be doing the assessment on a regular basis. And that would be to look at making sure that your skills and your currency in the sector are up to date. But you'd also be carrying out assessments on your learners, and they could be students, children, depending on the setup in which you are working. Some part of this role would also entail management responsibility, wherein they are looking at mapping the curriculum with regards to the Department of Further Education, off-call, making sure regulatory requirements are met, and there are delivery standards being met in order to ensure academic rigor and also to ensure that, some sort of standards are met with regards to key stage 1, for example, when we talk about schools, key stage 2 and key stage 3. And then there is pastoral care or pastoral support, which is quite important in any sort of an educational setup. But they generally tend to be the key broad areas in which I can put any role into, the field of education and training. Now, if I put, and if I start to look at relationships within this area, then relationships can be built beyond one within the setup, and it can be beyond the classroom and beyond the four walls of the school or the educational and training setup. But these relationships tend to become a key part and parcel of how the academic delivery happens within a particular setup. Now, they can be across students, teachers, colleagues, professionals, administrative and supportive staff, and obviously with external bodies. Some of these external bodies tend to be regulators. So in the case of schools, it could be Ofqual. In the case of FE colleges, it could be, ISI, Inspectorate of Schools. It could also be Quality Assurance Agency for large FE colleges and universities. And it could be other regulatory bodies like British Council or, in terms of give you an idea, for example, when you look at, say, for example, hospitals, it could be CQC. If I look at healthcare professionals, it could be the HCPC as a body, but there are lots of external bodies, industry bodies, which could also, be key stakeholders within a particular setup looking at delivering education and training. But if we restrict ourselves to, say, school or an FE college, whichever setting we take as an example going forward in this unit, you would normally have Ofqual as one of them, and there would be ISI or some of the other government-related bodies which could form, or within, if it's an institution which is having lots and lots of schools which manage as a group, then it could be the corporate side of things within the organization or within the company, which tends to manage, some of these external relationships. So if I look at grammar schools in the Manchester area, just to give you an idea, from my own experience, the Laureate Group or the Loris Group essentially manages a number of schools, in the Greater Manchester area, and they would also be managing some of the relationship with accreditation bodies like NCFE or AQA in some cases, or Pearson when we look at sixth form or GCSE in particular, and they would constitute, looking and maintaining relationships with these external key stakeholders to ensure that they are in good stead, and obviously they are meeting the standards when inspections happen. They're able to meet the standards and obviously, keep on top of some of the quality standards required to, keep the institution and the setups running. Now, in terms of the theoretical frameworks, if I put it this way, that we would draw some sort of inflection from that we've studied in Unit 3, I would say when we say relationship and when we talk about understanding our roles within the education sector, we look at the first thing that we look at is primarily the Bloom's economy. And when we talk about Bloom's, taxonomy, sorry, it tends to be, the pyramid wherein he proposed that, okay, when we look at developing the curriculum or creating a framework, the framework is based on knowledge, then it goes to understanding, application. Some part of it is then down to analysis, synthesis, and finally evaluation at the end, which tends to help develop this process, which tends to then help develop the higher level skills of critical thinking within learners. So when he looked at classifying, the levels of the intellectual behavior, we found that 95% of the questions that he asked when he proposed this particular model was to identify the cognitive and the critical thinking, and knowledge that you can gain from critical thinking skills. And that is where the Bloom's taxonomy comes into play. We also can draw a bit of inflection from the Vygotsky's social development theory, which primarily, focuses on the fact that social interaction in classrooms are very important. If there are no activities or if there are no interactions, icebreaker sessions, question answer sessions, group discussions. If there is no interaction amongst learner, what we do get to see is that at some stage, he proposed what is called the zone of proximal development. We do get to see that learners then separate out in different zones. And what then tends to happen is some learners learn more within the classroom settings, and some of them do not learn or cannot learn because they feel alienated in this particular theoretical model that he proposed. So the ZPD concept, which is the zone of proximal development, where learners need guidance and social interaction to enable and further their learning, was quite important. And that is what we'll also get to see when we look at going down into some of the assessment criteria. And then last but not the least, we look at, the CLOBS learning cycle or the learning curve, which he proposed, wherein we go through some of these, I would say, the steps through which we are able to, let's say, look at learning. And that learning tends to be primarily because it happens in stages. And these important stages that we go through then help us develop skills, knowledge, and obviously a better understanding of how we would, do or conduct ourselves in a particular situation should we face that again with a bit of hindsight. So the CLOBS experiential learning theory can help us draw inflections into when teachers essentially look at adjusting their delivery in the class. So if I put a practical example, sometimes I have learners, who are doing a particular level of course, but their initial assessment in terms of the rigor in terms of testing has not been done. And I do feel that they are not at the right level in terms of their study. So sometimes what I have to do as a teacher is to adjust my delivery to make sure that I need to, in some cases, pay more attention. And that is where I start to then get into developing smarter targets and individual learning plans for some learners, because I do feel they are going to be laggards or they are basically getting left behind. And in some cases, then I, let's say, fall back onto the CLOBS experiential learning curve, which is to say, what has happened with this particular learner? Why do we see that the learner is not able to, pick up? And in some cases, after a first bit of evaluation by looking at the assignment or the exam that they've taken, I'm able to analyze and make sense of it all, saying that, okay, they might not be at the right level, and in some cases come up to a conclusion to say, okay, you should not study this program, or look at a lower level program. And then that tends to reflect using the experiential learning theory, CLOBS theory. So when we look at this particular aspect of understanding roles, responsibilities, and how relationships develop within the close walls of where we teach or where we are involved in the education and training setup, can have let's say, you can actually look at understanding them by taking help of some of the theoretical frameworks, and each of them can be put into practice by taking up an example to explain roles, responsibilities, relationships, and how they help in the firming up of cognitive critical development, critical thinking, and knowledge related skills within learners, whether it's in a school, whether it's in a let's say, FE college, or at the university level. Is that okay? Any questions on this?
Okay, so far.
Okay. So if I go into now, with a bit of that overall understanding, go into the first assessment criteria, which talks about analyzing my own role and responsibility within the setup. So here, what I would suggest is that you need to look at this task as a bit of a task that you are going to analyze your own role and responsibility within, the special educational needs in this case. I have done this from a point of view of putting it as an example on the slides, wherein I've looked at my own role in terms of what I teach, what are the core subjects or discipline areas that I teach, and in those core discipline and subject areas, what are my key role in my role as a lecturer for that particular subject management or strategic management, what are the key responsibilities that I execute, and how these responsibilities help in running the provision. So that's what I've said, that when I do teach learners at level 6 and 7, what I tend to do is do a broad spectrum of activities to help in facilitating high quality of learning, because people here are at the management level or at least stepping into management, and their main reason of studying the qualification is to be able to get hold of live examples and obviously situations that they are able to see, comprehend, and then overcome when they apply theoretical aspects of it, what they've studied with me in the course. So what I did was I essentially drew up a table, and in that table, I basically looked at four broad responsibilities that I've got in that particular role as a lecturer. And in order to accomplish and obviously explain the first task, what I did was created a bit of a table just to put the evidence across in a much more easily digestible and presentable manner. I divided that across into four areas. One is I look at course planning. And then the second area I look at is course delivery. The third area that I look at is assessments. And the fourth area is normally getting involved along with the course director or the course leader to look at managing external examiner visits. And these tend to then form or take up, I would say, 88, 90% of my time as far as these activities are concerned. So what I've done is I've explained my role. So in your case, you might want to analyze, your own role and responsibility. And this is something that you could do, with the help of a table. And course planning, when I look at, I design the syllabus or at least follow the awarding body syllabus, understand what are the requirements, what are the key knowledge descriptors. And then when I look at the knowledge descriptors, I create presentations or materials around that particular knowledge descriptors, learning outcomes, and indicative content which is given, include relevant case models or case studies and theoretical frameworks and models to explain that during the course of my delivery. And then
So would that,
sorry,
so
go
if I
on.
did if I did a table like that, would that then provide the evidence, or would I be able to kind of refer to that when I do the assignment, or would I still need to write about it, or would the table be evidence enough?
No, I think the table would be evidence enough.
Okay.
What you will need to do is explain that table in a couple of words after that. And in my case, if I were to do this task, what I would also do is maybe put a next column here, which will basically show some evidence. So in my case of course planning, I'll probably include a document here, which will say what kind of course planning I've done. Say for the HR unit, how do I look at delivery? So here I would include a link for a Zoom session. Assessment of assignments, I would basically say a learner's assignment that I've got, I would put that across as a bit of an annexure towards the end, and I'll say, okay, refer to assessed work of a learner ABC. And then
So I've got, so basically at the end of, so I'm teaching relationships and sexual education. So at the end of each unit, I do like a end of unit recap kind of learning. So would
yes,
that be something then I could attach there?
yes,
And then
yes, you
another
can.
thing that I could attach here somewhere would be like a lesson plan or something. Would that be able
Yep,
to go in somewhere eventually?
absolutely, yes. So when we look at course planning, you could attach a schema work or a lesson plan here. For course delivery, you could put maybe a slide or any sort of an activity that you've done. And these could be annexures, essentially. After you've drawn up the table, you explain that in a couple of words. Then some part of it could be attached as evidence in the annexure to show what has been actually, what do you mean by when I say course planning, or what do you mean by course delivery in my case. And in the case of a school, it could be, as you rightly mentioned, a lesson plan or a scheme of work, and it could be something which you put picture across for an activity carried out for course delivery or a particular session that you've done, and that would be good enough.
I'm just beginning to see sort of now that it's not going to be kind of like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not very good at linking things together. So I think what you're trying to say is this, when you said about assignment, this kind of unit's kind of a lot of evidence base. I think I'm finally like beginning to realize that now, if that makes sense.
Yes, So
it's not going to be like reams and reams of words, which is obviously what my assignments to date are looking like. This is more about evidence and presenting in a way kind of to explain it more than like have reams and reams of like words and paragraphs when I can do it in a different way. Is that what you're getting at?
That is correct. So in the first unit, you would be looking at with me creating some evidence which will probably then be used as a cross-reference for some of the other units as well.
And then
So,
I've obviously already given you a few examples of how
yes.
hopefully I can do that. And you've said that that would kind of work so far with what I've kind of suggested. So that's good. Good to hear.
Yes. And the bits that we can include would depend on the fact that, if they are available, we don't need to be able to, it for all the, let's say in all instances for all assessment criteria, but in some cases, they would primarily be done, if you can do it, it would be best to, do it so that you have this to be able to cross-reference and obviously mention for some of the other units as well, because otherwise what will happen is it'll just feel like it's a bit of a descriptive bit that has been done. And that would be, it will also pass. It is not a case wherein it will not. But I think 9 out of 10 times what I've seen with with this particular qualification learners are doing, I will treat this as a bit of a, my comprehensive, let's say, repository, which I will then use probably on a day in, day out basis when I'm actually getting into teaching. And because some of the learners who do this qualification with us are actually looking at picking this up as a starting qualification and they have no prior experience of actually doing it, that is where the collation of templates basically collation of these templates in detail with a bit of a sample gives them an idea if they need to come back and refer to it in the future.
Okay, that makes sense.
Stuff. So, and in terms of after doing the table, as you had asked, do I need to write something about it? So what I've done is I've done a bit of a reflection on it in a couple of words to say, what do I do in course planning? What do I mean by course delivery? Because these are quite heavy and strong words, but sometimes you have to, explain them in terms of what do I do? So I've just taken one unit and I explained this is what I do and how do we do the assessment? What do I mean by the EQA visits? I've just done a bit of a reflection in terms of explaining that in a couple of words. The table so that it does not sit alone as an evidence for task 1.1, but there's a bit of a documentary or, let's say commentary, not documentary, commentary on it to explain what do I mean by my roles and responsibilities. Is that okay?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just writing.
That's fine. So the second bit that I want to look at now with regards to is to go into the second assessment criteria, which talks about key aspects of legislation and regulatory requirements. Now, there are loads of regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
We need to discuss this in context of teaching, directly in context of teaching or education and training. And when we talk about the codes of practice, I'm not talking about a code of practice for a doctor or code of practice for a lawyer.
Yeah, specifically in relation to education.
Yeah, absolutely. In relation even to education would be quite broad. What I would look at is code of practice just in relation to a teacher or a lecturer or a specific role, because it is quite a vast area when I talk about codes of practice. So when I look at codes of practice and I talk teachers, there's a guidance document available, on the .gov website. There's a guidance document available from SET, which is the Society of Education and Training. Sometimes when learners finish this qualification, they want to go to the QTLS. They would then refer to maybe the SET code of practice for teachers, which is defined by SET. And this is an extensive document which talks about, the guidance which is created by off-call in general, for schools or teachers essentially working within education and training setup, and that is generally school. So if somebody is to look at reading that particular document, which I'm also going to make available on Moodle. I will show you that document if you give me 1 second just to show you what I mean when I talk about standards, when I talk about codes of practice. So this was the last standard which was released and updated by the DFE after the 2001 standard in 2013. And the latest terminology of it obviously has come out in some shape or form, because some part of it is now done through various other regulatory bodies like ISI, Ofqual. So this is a good document for reading, so that you understand. Just to give you a parallel example, if I was an IT guy or an IT professional and I was working within an organization and maintaining, some IT assets and hardware, I would be required to, let's say, adhere to certain codes of practice or standards. Similarly, if I'm a teacher in a school, I'm expected to be aware of the minimum requirements for me to work within that setup. And that would mean that I have a good understanding of the codes of practice, which is basically legislation. What is it? What it means, how it is applied within the setup, and then to a certain aspect, the regulatory part of it, which cannot be compromised. I cannot say that I don't know about it. I cannot brush it aside. I have to be aware of that regulatory requirement, which means that I'm adhering to that code of practice and I'm being able to do my job, able to delegate or, complete my responsibility to a certain particular standard. And this document basically talks about, the understanding of what the code of practice is for teachers, what it is, its legal standing, and specifically what is the interpretation when we look at teachers who essentially have a QTLS status. So this is a bit of additional reading that you can do should you wish to do so, just to up your knowledge and also refresh what are the teaching standards that you need to be adhering with. Now, in the task and in the presentation slide, what I've done is I have referred to certain regulatory bodies, which basically help set the standards in this sector. So some of them are Quality Assurance Agency, Department of Further Education, or Department for Education, and the Office of Students. It could also include Ofqual, specifically for schools, or ISI, the Independent Schools Inspectorate. And there could be other Quangos, which we sometimes call semi-government bodies, which basically look at maintaining, upkeeping, and let's put it this way, setting standards, which could be then followed by various providers within this particular sector. And again, what I've done is, because this is like a can of worms, there is so much to talk about. What I've done is I've created a bit of a table, and what I've said is, okay, these are the key standards which these bodies prescribe, and they are relevant to my teaching role in this way. So again, in order to look at addressing this particular assessment criteria, what we need to be able to do is, it says summarize. First part is summarize. I don't want to be writing and documenting a lot of things, but what I want to be able to do is relate it to the aspect of what my day-to-day role is, and sum up some of the key aspects on one table and then relate it to how they are relevant to my teaching role. And that would be good enough in order for us to be able to hit this assessment criteria. Now, what we also want to do is, apart from this, talk about some of the key legislations which are absolute must in terms of adhering and must in terms of implementing when I'm teaching and conducting my duties, roles, and responsibilities as a teacher within a particular setup.
Sorry, can I just check? So in
Yeah.
terms of the table, with regards to summarising the legislation and regulatory requirements, as with the previous table which we just looked at about the responsibilities, would that then be sufficient evidence to do it in that way again?
It would be sufficient evidence, yes, but what you will need to do is, the table that we looked at previously was discussing roles and responsibilities only. Now, this is discussing roles and responsibilities in relation to the key legislations and regulatory bodies. So there's a bit of a difference in terms of generically talking about the role that you carry out on a day-to-day basis and the role that you execute or you get into that particular role when it relates to legislation and inspections by some of the regulatory bodies in a particular setup.
But you could do it in that format.
Yeah, you could do that in that format as well.
I just think it might. I'm just trying to think other ways because, as you know, I struggle with like word counts and stuff. So I think for me, this would be an easier visual kind of way, hopefully, then to condense it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so in my sessions, I would always advise that we would be looking at wherever we can actually present information in the
Yeah,
form of tables, flow charts, mind maps, because at the end of the day, there's so much to put across in this qualification. We
yeah,
can do tons and tons of research, but what we want to do is basically narrow it down,
yeah.
summarize it, filter it down to our role and what is directly related to my role as far as the learning outcome is concerned. And sometimes using tables, using diagrams, or if there are loads of diagrams and charts you will find which are available, on the .gov website, because within teaching, and when you look at lifelong learning on the .gov website, there are lots and lots of papers and research papers which are published, and they have lots of these diagrams. And I normally would bring them across in my slides. You would see them that rather than me start from scratch, I'd probably use that to, put a point across and then justify it in the form of how it is related to what I'm trying to do.
I just think it might be a better way, sort of moving forward.
Yes, surely. I think in some cases we would be able to use this, primarily for some of the sections, or I would say the, learning outcomes and some of the assessment criteria of some of the units.
Mm.
Now, in terms of, various acts and legislation, obviously as a teacher, there are loads of them. So I can list a few: Computer Misuse Act 2010. Obviously, the Safeguarding Act is a part of the Health and Social Care Act of 2012. There are a lot of them which we can include, but what I have done is basically looked at some of the key ones which I think are quite important. And those are the ones that I've looked at covering very briefly. Now, there are handouts available, and I don't think I need to provide a few of them, because when you do a quick search on Google, you'd get details of it in terms of how these are important. Now, the bit that I need to relate this to, and that is where the collation of evidence comes in, as annexures, would be to try and get hold of the Equality and Diversity Act or a policy of your own organization. Look at your data protection policy in your organization, look at the health and safety policy in your organization, the safeguarding policy, and also some of the, or computer misuse, IT related policy within the organization. Those policies that you bring out, or if you're able to get hold of them, would essentially help you understand these acts, because the policies are written out as documents that everyone within the organization has to follow. They take into account the important parts of the act and the legislation which are required to be implemented within a particular educational setup. So they tell you exactly as a white paper that this is what you need to do if there's an incident which happens, or this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to follow as a guidance to be able to adhere to and report some of these incidents if they do happen within the organization. So
So when you're talking about relevant legislation, you've obviously got some key ones there.
yes,
So would I incorporate that into this piece of work, or would I just focus on kind of the key policies within my organisation, or is it both that you need to kind of
well,
evidence?
I would say if you write it down like I've done, because obviously the task requires you to summarize.
Yeah. So would it be those kind of 1, 2, 3,
Yes,
4, 5? So would I
yeah.
focus on those 5, but then how would I kind of incorporate that then into my work in terms of because we've got loads of key policies. So how would you kind of narrow that down? And then what am I doing with those? Am I just kind of providing like a summary, or do I need to actually provide like the evidence, the actual copies of the documents?
See, I would suggest that you write them out first in, say, 25, 30 words. And then to support it towards the end, what you say is, okay, I've enclosed a copy of the equality and diversity policy of the organization. And
how many of these policies and like procedures would you sort of
again,
give
I
us
would say, if I was to look at a school or a setup,
yeah,
there
because there's loads.
there could be 100 policies. In our setup, we have, obviously about 119 policies. Now,
Yeah, we've
you
got
don't
a
want to
lot.
look at all that. What my role in my area as a teacher involves is I need to look at the bare minimum of these. So if I am dealing with students on a day in, day out basis, children on a day in, day out basis, I need to ensure that these are the bits that I need to adhere to. So things like safeguarding would be more important. Things like equality and diversity would be more important. Special needs would be more important. And those are 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. You can actually, 2, 3 is what I would say, list out 4 or 5 or 6 of them which are relevant to your area of day-to-day operation. But in terms of annexures or evidence, you can have 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 which you can attach as annexures.
So 5 or 6 list kind of the key ones and summarize, and then when I'm adding them in, I'd actually put the 2 or 3 sort of key ones as appendices. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because otherwise, you're going to just be going through reams and reams, reams and reams and reams.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, again, the focus is looking at your specific area. Now, if I work within a school and I work as a subject tutor or as a form tutor, I am very clear that I only deal with this, and that is what my area of remit is. I'm not the course leader, or I'm not the leader in terms of the curriculum leader, or the course leader for a particular section or a class. And in such cases, my responsibilities would be to look at day-to-day basis, and that is what I would cover in this particular bit. So only those policies which I think would be bits reflect directly related to me. And then what I've done is I've listed them down, and I've done a bit of a reflective analysis in terms of how do I adhere to these standards and key legislation and policies, acts essentially when I look at my day-to-day responsibility. Is that okay? So listing out a few of them and then reflecting on how you follow them through, that would be good enough. And for evidence purposes, you attach 1 or 2 of them as the annexure. Okay.
Yes, sorry, just a reflection, like just a summary of what I do and how I follow them. So what they are, and then what I do in my job to follow these procedures and policies. Yep, that sounds okay so far.
The next one is basically looking at the relationship and boundaries between teaching and other professional roles. Now, if I look at within the setup, obviously there are different people in different areas. You have administration, you have operations, you have security, you have teaching and learning, you have for example, people within management. And what we are looking at here is basically a bit of an analysis in terms of what is the relationship that you have with your supervisor, if they are within the teaching role, or how do your responsibilities intersect with some of the other roles and people which are working in other roles within a similar setup. So here, again, what I've done is, because it talks about analysis, I've actually used a table, and that table essentially gives my understanding of, in terms of how do I work across with some of the other key roles within the educational setup that I work in. So in my case, I have academic support staff, I have administrative staff, I have people who offer information, advice, and guidance, which are basically nothing short of acting as counselors. There are people in the IT support. There are people who are essentially only looking at carrying out research and research-related activities to further develop the courses and obviously, the curriculum that we teach and deliver. And then some of the external bodies that I deal with on a regular basis, and how do I basically look at maintaining a one-on-one relationship, or at least be on talking terms with some of these external bodies or professionals within their representatives within the bodies. So one of the things which I have put across in the table is, like, I'm a center manager or a center coordinator for a couple of awarding bodies. So how do I maintain close relationships with my counterpart in Ascentis or my counterpart in NCFE, who come in and visit us for external visits or external examination or for external quality assurance visits? And that is what I've explained, with regards to this table. So in my relationship, in terms of my direct role as teacher and teaching and delivering of this session, how do I look at maintaining some of the key aspects of it with the counterparts, which essentially are working parallel to me, but not maybe within the same setup, but within a parallel setup or an awarding organization in this case. And I've drawn up a table to explain that, and that kind of helps us nicely kind of summarize, the part that we want to look at in terms of relationship with teaching. What is the main bit, and how do I reflect it and relate it to the other person who's my counterpart in a body? Now, give you an example. You're doing a teaching qualification with us, but at some stage we will have Samantha, which is one of the external examiners, who would be coming in and looking at sampling your work. So in my role as a teacher and as an assessor for this qualification, I would have an interaction with her, and those interactions would tend to be a couple of times during the course of the year, to keep her updated on progress of the learners in the course, to ensure that she's able to sample some of the work, and to also ensure that she is able to, the feedback that she provides, we are able to act on that feedback to be able to look at adopting either best practices or to get certain areas of improvement. Now, her working and my understanding of working with her and building a rapport in terms of a good relationship with her is to primarily look at the aspect of me maintaining excellent relationship with her from a point of view of an external body who is our principal. And obviously, she is one of the representatives who comes in and looks at releasing certification after sampling of work is done. So I need to be able to clearly ensure that she has all the requirements, all the material, and all the details that are required for her to conduct a thorough sampling. And that allows us to feel confident that we are, as a role in the assessor, I'm able to maintain and uphold the standards which are required, or for example, in my case as an assessor, teach and deliver to the standards which is required to meet the academic rigor of that particular unit. And she would have an interaction with me for a couple of minutes during the visit to find out a bit about the profile of the learners, profile, any updates that I've had within the organization in terms of my academic side, and in some cases also looking at how have I looked at updating my currency and my skills and keeping it up to date with the changes in the qualification which are happening. With a quality manager, that might mean that he or she would be looking at having discussions on, maintaining the standards which are required to be able to teach this and deliver this qualification, making sure assessments happen on time, making sure that the IQA process follows the guidelines as laid down by NCFE, and that would be a working relationship which the quality manager or the lead IQA would have with an external, examiner. And that would be, showing the bit in terms of this criteria, which talks about what are the bits that you can, communicate and share and, let's say, work with when you're looking at working with a person who's parallel to you in an awarding organization or in an external body, and how do you maintain relationship in that role to be on the talking terms or on the terms wherein you're able to meet and exceed, or say meet and meet the requirements of the individual in terms of what let's say documentation or evidence they need in terms of supporting the visits or the inspections. So followed by the table, I end up doing a reflective analysis, and that is to explain some parts of the table to add a bit of narrative to what do I mean by relationship between teaching and other professionals. So I've taken three in particular: one in terms of the external body, second in terms of some of the colleagues that I work with on a day in day out basis, and last but not the least, students or some of the IT other related professions that I normally depend on and work with to ensure my delivery and teaching is in line with
So
the.
I'm just trying to think about obviously because I work in quite a specialist setting within SEN. So the kind of the people that I kind of interact with is not really external people. It's
Mhm.
more like internal people. So obviously I work with teachers, other support assistants. Obviously we've got admin, we've got IT, and then we've got obviously a whole range of different therapists on site. So we've got speech and language, occupational therapist, drama therapist, counsellor.
And
So
that
we've got
is what you would mention. That is what you would mention. So you would not probably look at all of them, but you
yeah.
mention the ones that you work with. I would say I work with a course coordinator on a daily basis. I work with one of the administrators on a daily basis, but I don't work with IT maybe once in a month or once in a quarter. Sometimes I get in touch. So those are the bits that you'll prioritize on the table and
So
actually
mine would be like teachers and the
teachers, yes, on a
therapists,
day in, day out
teachers
basis.
and therapists.
Yes. That would be good. And then towards the end, what you're looking at doing is obviously explaining that with a bit of a narrative to, if you do a table, then obviously explain that with a bit of narrative at the end to say, okay, this is what I do and that's what I mean.
I think that'll be easier, honestly do.
Okay, good stuff. So the next and the last assessment criteria in learning outcome one is basically describing some of the points of referral that we need to be able to meet the needs of some of our learners. So what do we mean by, points of referral? Any idea that
Sorry,
you?
say that again.
So the last assessment criteria talks about, meeting the points of referral in terms of needs for learners. So what do you mention? What do you mean by point of referral?
Would that be if they, so obviously they've come in and then we may refer them, so within our organisation they come in, but then if we feel that they would benefit from additional kind of support or interventions within the school, that kind of sometimes is a referral list. So for counselling, not every individual student has access to the counselling, for example. It's based on, their needs. So would that be what you mean there?
To a certain extent, yes, but not entirely. I think what I mean here is when I talk about point of referral is that when we do talk about students or children in general looking at referring to benchmarks, or for example,
Oh,
when
okay.
you would provide me, say for example, if I study this qualification, which is the awarding body, or in some cases, if I do this qualification, what are the standards that I'm going to meet, and what is it that I are going to be avoided? So point of reference tend to be from an educational setup point of view, awarding bodies. They could be regulatory bodies that are asking you to meet certain criteria in terms of quality standards or compliances. But when I talk in terms of students in general, which are in the classroom and are looking at teachers, and when we teach in terms of teaching and delivery, what we are looking at is points of reference in terms of resources, in terms of infrastructure. We are also looking at certain areas which would then mean that in some cases we are looking at what would be the minimum requirements that we need to be able to meet to be able to provide for the learners an environment which will allow them to prosper and obviously look at meeting the standards. So when I say kids passing key stage one, they need to at some stage be tested. At key stage 2, they need to be tested. But what the testing would be is the points of referral. So they would need to meet a certain criteria to be able to progress to the next, class or the next level. And in those cases, what we mean is that we are directly going to be, as teachers, addressing needs which will arise during the course of their learning journey, and that will allow them to successfully then complete that journey, and they would be termed as referral points. More like, I would say, milestones, more like, let's say, signposting certain key areas that we need to be able to meet as teachers, as when we look at our targets, that we need to be able to meet those targets, and they would be termed as, points of referral. Now, when I talk about common points of referrals that we look at in terms of enabling learners to be able to learn, children to be able to learn, they could be classified into these many types. They could be academic support, they could be emotional and psychological support. You would at some stage provide career guidance, health services, financial aid, special needs and accessibility, which could be for children which have special needs. You would, in some cases, also be looking at providing legal advice, technical support, and obviously research or other such facilities which allow resources to be made available for teaching and learning. Now, what I mean by points of referral to a certain extent is we need to be able to identify the needs of the children or the learners or the students that we are teaching. And these needs would be essentially identified across these broad areas. And that is what I would refer to when I talk about academic need or a special need or a psychological need or a pastoral support need. And that would be something that I would look at, from a point of view of point of referral. So when I look at teaching observations in your case, one of the points of reference for teaching observation is the Ofsted standard for teaching observation. When I talk about the school's standard of, school's point of referral regarding standards is the off-call report, wherein they are either classed after the inspection as outstanding, good, or average, or not meeting the criteria. They would be termed as points of referral. But when we specifically talk about children, when we are looking at, or when we talk about learners, students, learners, children, whichever way you address them, we are looking at these common areas as point of referrals. Academic support, which would say what kind of learning support they need. And in some cases, when I talk about learning support, you would need to look at maybe carrying out a learning style questionnaire. That learning style questionnaire will tell us whether the learner is a kinesthetic learner, auditory learner, visual learner. And that would mean that when you prepare your lessons, when you try and prepare your delivery sessions and your delivery in the class, you are looking at addressing the, let's say the learning styles that you would depend on would actually be dependent on what initial assessments have been carried out, what you've got through in terms of the, let's say, the feedback in terms of the learning style that you have after completing that. And that allows you to essentially plan your session or your lesson delivery in a way which meets the needs of your children or the learners in that classroom. And that would be looking at, then putting resources in place. Those resources and the way you would design and deliver the session would then be meeting the needs of the learners in the classroom. Is that okay?
Yep.
So in some cases, we would be looking at, let's say, if I take another example, in some cases, it would be looking at different types of activities that you would plan in a class, which you are conducting a session, or, when you do this, you do it in a way wherein they would meet the needs or the skill set of the learners, and that would allow them to then learn in that particular environment the way you plan the activity. And that would be another example of, say, for example, their, let's say, academic support, but in some cases, if they need any sort of further support, like emotional or physiological or physical support, then you are able to do that. Sometimes we see children from disadvantaged background, when we look at the meals, being provided free of cost in schools, sometimes you need to be showing evidence from a family or a parent point of view that you are on, say, for example, universal tax credit, or this is the income in the house, and that allows the school then to look at financial aid. And in some cases, in schools, you don't look at, children would qualify for, say, the free meals, in a school. But sometimes you would look at scholarships and loans and educational grants, which can also be provided in different setups, like a higher education setup or a university, and that would be looking at, financial aid as a point of referral. Is that okay?
Yep.
And then what I've done again is looked at one or two areas that I can explain. Obviously, I've picked up a lot of them, lot of different types of points of referral in the table, and I've picked out one or two and obviously explained it in the context of giving an example, and that would be, helping us meet this particular criteria. Is that okay? So that helps us bring, it brings us to the end of our discussion for learning outcome 1 in particular, which is where I would suggest that some parts of it would be contextualization of your own role and responsibility, looking at the acts and legislation which are specifically related to you when you carry out your day-to-day responsibility. And last but not the least, looking at the aspect of the people that you work with, again, on a day in, day out basis. So covering those only for the third assessment criteria. And the last one, we are looking at points of referral that you take into account as a teacher when you teach and deliver, and you conduct your sessions on a day-to-day basis in the classroom.
I think that's the one that I need to give some more thought to, that last one, but it's just because it was the new concept to me. So points of referral. So I think I need to do a bit more work on that one, but I think the rest seem a bit clearer, I think. And are all those references easily accessible online?
Yes, they're all easily accessible online, yes.
Okay. So I think that's no more questions so far. So yeah, I think that's all good. I think I really do think that the tables are gonna be a way forward, I think. And then I can start trying to collate, hopefully when I'm back at work this week at some point, I can start getting some of those templates you've mentioned together. So then I've got them when it comes to obviously collating all the evidence for the assignment. If I start getting them together now, I think that would be a good idea rather than last minute. But if you can obviously send that big list that you promised, then I could sort of tick them off as I've kind of found them, if that makes sense.
Sure, not a problem. So I'll catch up with you tomorrow. We will discuss learning outcome 2. Again, there are some templates. Obviously, I think that is where we'll end up using the WARC and the ILP in particular. But what I will do is obviously some of the ones.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
So some of the ones that we are looking at covering in learning outcome 2 are already, what I'm going to do is obviously move that folder up onto the top just before learning outcome 1. So the ones that we are looking at, which we have covered today and tomorrow, are already in the folder as far as templates are concerned. So you should be able to download the templates and then look at them for the purposes of, just for idea's sake. But I think what you need to be able to do for learning outcome 1 is get hold of the policies from the organization in particular, which are going to be useful, because the bit that we need to look at cross-referencing here is essentially going to be the codes of practice legislation, and that would come across from the policy. The first part is more of your own understanding of the role, and the third part that we have looked at, and the fourth part we have looked at, is primarily explaining the role in context of legislation and relationships that you maintain and work with on a day in, day out basis.
Yep, that makes sense.
Good
So
stuff.
we're going to carry on with this unit tomorrow for
Tomorrow
learning
as well. Yeah,
outcome
same
2.
time. Yeah, same time.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
No worries,
See you
Patricia.
tomorrow, Ryman. Take
Yeah,
care.
yeah. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.